Welcome to the Consultants Way podcast, where we explore the world of professional services consulting. Hosted by Dean McMahon and Anthony Paluska, each episode delivers expert insights, real-world stories, and interviews with top consultants to help you refine your consulting skills.
All right. Today we have Bill Henry joining us, and we're very excited to speak with Bill. Bill's a seasoned professional that has experience in product businesses, running these organizations, as well as in the professional services and the services space, both domestically and globally. And we're just really excited, Bill, to have you on here and glean some knowledge from you as part of this whole process. So, Bill, if you don't mind, just introduce yourself a little bit and let us know a bit of your background.
Well, thanks, Anthony. I mean, I started out in consulting in that pure professional services world early in my career, and I think it was a great foundation to build on. And then from there, I really took the next step into product-related consulting. And one of the surprises I had along the way is that it's a much different challenge than running a pure pro services practice. And then the next step was to really go from running a services practice in a product company to running product companies and actually trying to design out the services element in the SaaS world so you can drive more recurring revenue and better valuations.
You know, Bill, one of the things we hear right now in the SaaS business is as a SaaS company becomes saturated in its available market, once again, PS begins to become more valuable and more important. Are you hearing that? Are you seeing that?
I think there's definitely some of that's happening. I also see a lot of customers in the SaaS world who are only getting a fraction of the value from the software because they didn't have that implementation process that you'd have in that more traditional, license model type software application.
Oh, wait a minute, Bill. Are you saying software doesn't implement itself? No, I'm confused.
Software does not implement itself well. It will implement itself, and implementation wizards are great. But to really get the value out of it, I mean, oftentimes this is where I think the crux of the value is how do you build your business around the software and really capitalize on the value it can deliver to your organization. And that's a tough challenge and very hard to do in the SaaS world.
Well, and I also thought we solved this whole problem because we all now have customer success teams, and that was supposed to solve all of this. Is that not it either?
Bill, we just sit out here confused all the time.
And you know what I think is great is we're just highlighting the difference between a pro services business and a product business. And that product business is all about customer success with the product and all about going out and driving adoption, driving down implementation costs, shortening that implementation timeline. And in the pro services world, it's not about that, right? It's about how do we tailor this solution to meet the unique needs of the customer? And oftentimes those different philosophies are at odds with each other.
Also, they make money different ways.
There's
a valuation thing there going on. But it is a fun time right now. So, Bill, take us a little bit through what it was like in your transition from, and you kind of leaped directly from professional services management to top job. What was that like when you changed from getting more billable time to, more transaction-oriented time as a CEO?
Wow, it's much tougher than it looks. And, looking backwards, I mean, what was funny is there was so much I didn't fully appreciate at the time. And so as I dug into it, I mean, it's really in a product company, you have all these issues around product strategy and product development and, the partnership strategy and things that are just so much different than pro services. So I was very fortunate where I had a really strong team. I was able to rely on them and learn very quickly with their guidance.
And as you move to multiple industries, one of the things that we love and hate in pro service, obviously, often we're focused on a type of client And I think as you've been in a few industries, Bill, and you've served multiple industries from one entity. What's that transition like?
Again, it's really interesting. I literally spent the first 10 years of my career focused on the telecom industry, and I knew it inside and out, and it was great. And the first time I had to go talk to a financial services customer when I was at PeopleSoft, for example, that telecom knowledge isn't helping you anymore. And so you have to learn exceptionally quickly about how do I bring this process to, I have some insight from the telecom world, but how do I build that insight for new industries and bring that to the table quickly? But again, how do I also work with the team that's in place who has that deep financial expertise and the ability to sort of put the story together to be compelling across multiple industries?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and we'll go in a bunch of directions, but just to pick on that, because so many of our listeners and people that we talk to have that challenge jumping from I'm a deep subject matter expertise in telecom, and now I'm in front of a financial services executive, and probably not even appreciating how much they actually know and can help that organization out. Any tips, tricks on how to navigate
You're moving from I'm only comfortable as an expert in a topic to I'm comfortable as a consulting expert and I can move around topics.
That's exactly where I was going to go, Dean. It's a little bit of the philosophy, and you know how to structure the conversation. You know that we're going to talk about 4 compelling things, and you might not know what the compelling things are for that industry, but you can find that out pretty quickly ahead of time. And so it's really relying on that consulting pro services base of capability and talent that you build to then go be able to cross those industries. And it's, again, a lot of it's about confidence and the ability to say, okay, I'm not an expert, but I know these are 4 burning issues that this executive cares about. And we have a solution to solve those problems. And to be able to tell that story is part of, I think, the key to making that transition.
And when you talked about confidence, one thing, Bill, even when you were very young and I had hair and I met you, you exude executive presence. One challenge for consultants dealing with executives is acting like feeling confident, feeling comfortable in that room and knowing I don't need to know everything. We'll get there, we'll discover it. But the executive wants to relate to an executive. They don't want to relate to a sales rep, no offense. They don't want to relate to a technical person. They want to relate to an executive. I mean, you did that very well, even when you were young. And you didn't have any more hair, though. You have all the same hair.
It was a little darker.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. It was on a younger face. I get that. So, hey, there's a couple other areas I'd like to dive into. Before we leave the transition between consulting and executive leadership, is there any just a takeaway or two you want us to get before we ask you some very personal questions? No, not very personal questions.
What I'd say is, again, as growing up in that pure consulting world, the metrics and the process and everything are fairly straightforward. And what I didn't appreciate, and again, looking back, the advice I'd give somebody who's going to make that transition from pure services to a product-driven services business is you've got to understand the value creation model for that industry you're going to. And it's totally different. So actually, in a product company, too much services revenue is bad. It actually drives down value, not drives up value. And so the whole idea, you've got to get your head around what are the economics drivers here and how do we make that successful? And I think that's one of the really interesting challenges that somebody can understand going in and be much smarter about it rather than having to learn on the job. License revenue, whether it's SaaS revenue or traditional license revenue, is what drives the valuation of those businesses. And services are about ensuring customer success, ensuring short implementations and successful projects, but it's not about growing a pro services business anymore. It's about growing a successful software company, which is a totally different animal.
Amen. So I'd like to transition to talk about what it was like for you to be a hot-blooded New Jersey. I think you were from New Jersey originally.
I grew up in California, actually.
That's what I said, California. and moving your entire family and team and everything overseas and running companies in different countries?
Well, I was going to say I always had the good fortune to travel internationally and always enjoyed experiencing different cultures. And then in the work environment, I had the opportunity to take a domestic business and really grow that internationally. We actually made the international part of the business bigger than the domestic part in that services world. And that was really exciting. I also then got a chance to go do that in the product company at PeopleSoft, where I was asked to go over and help professionalize it and sort of bring the best practices we'd built in North America to the European team. And again, there's two dimensions to this that you're working in. One is bringing that best practice and how do you do this and what's the best way to do it. But the other one is understanding the local culture. So you can imagine how showing up in Paris saying, I'm the American from corporate and I'm here to help is really a great way to start that process.
Oh, yeah, because they'll never
Open
say,
arms.
They will never say, Monsieur, that will not work here. They will always just say, whatever the Americans do, we'll do.
What's funny is, we were able to make it work. And you didn't make it work the same way, but you sat down with a team and, it's about building the relationships and the trust. And, the German issues are different than the French issues that are different than the Brit issues. But it's understanding what those issues are, looking for what's the win for them. And so, for example, in this case, we had a group of services businesses that were captive to the license teams in each country and really didn't spend any time or even have a lot of discussion amongst each other. So we, in essence, built that services culture and ethos across the European business, which I think was a key part in being able to then start dramatically improving performance. So it was, the same basic process that you always use, right? Clear vision of what we're trying to accomplish, clear strategy on here's what we're going to do, here's the organization structure, here's the key metrics, and then we're going to manage this day in and day out. And made great strides over a 12-month period. But I think you have to, again, anybody going to work in Europe from America needs to understand that they're not the same. And while that sounds simplistic, the people in Louisiana and California and New York have an awful lot more in common than a Dutch and a German person who live relatively close to each other geography-wise. And so it's really, a collection of markets, and you have to approach each one independently and be smart about how you work with those people in a way that's consistent with what's in their best interest.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. The biggest mistake I've seen organizations make as they're looking at their various markets, but Europe in particular is like this, is, hey, this is our European strategy for something. And you can't
There's
really,
no European
you
strategy.
can't really have a European strategy in the same way you can have a US strategy around something, or even a North American strategy, because the Germans and the Dutch and the French, they all have very different needs, and they need to be, their markets are different, and their people and their culture and what it takes to get them motivated to act and move in the interest that you're trying to drive as a leader of them. It's all very different and requires working with each of them individually. And so it's just all too often I hear the European strategy and I just cringe a little bit, because there's just no way. There's just no way it works like that.
There's no way. And the other thing that again, I got introduced to firsthand was the markets are different, not only because of the culture, but in the ERP space, SAP was dominant in Europe, where they were a major player here in the US, but not dominant. And so I remember the first time I went to a sales meeting with my German team, literally the first thing said was the salesperson stood up and apologized for not being SAP, which, as a competitor, that was hard to
That was hard to hear. It's like Americans that go and apologize for being American. I'm just sorry we're American. So, but then you went and you actually took over running. You moved physically and ran businesses. I think your first one, you moved to the UK first?
I did. And so went to run a series of product companies across Europe. And again, that was really interesting because the American market's very big and very defined and a consistent set of rules. Whereas you take software in Europe and there's some consistency, but tremendous amounts of variation. And then you start taking that to Asia or to parts of Africa, and there's huge variation there. So it's a very different challenge where you've got a fragmented set of markets, and you've got to build a software solution that works across those very different sets of requirements. The part of the thing that I think is really interesting there is that software ethos. I mean, one interesting thing I was very surprised at in Europe is every technology company operates in Europe, but most of those operations are sales and marketing. So you think about US businesses that have a European operations group, they don't do development there. They don't do product specification there. They're basically selling the core global product to local customers. And so there's a totally different talent challenge in Europe. And finding those people who know how to build and scale a software business in Europe is a totally different animal than in the US.
Was it different having most of your employees not being what you were used to from a culture point of view?
Shockingly different. And again, these are great lessons learned. One of the tools I call cultural norming is you have to figure out what people are trying to tell you. And so I remember one day I was in Belgium with our Belgian team, and I asked them how the project was going. And the project manager said, "It's quite okay." Now, as an American, that doesn't sound terribly compelling. And then, my next meeting is we're reviewing something in the States, and I asked the project manager how it was going. He said, it's great. And what I found reflecting on that is, in Belgium, quite okay is actually really, really good. And in America, great doesn't mean anything.
Right, exactly.
And so
great means
you have to sort of
non-horrible.
listen. Exactly. You have to listen to the words and then understand the background that they're being communicated from in order to really figure it out. And so I think it's very unique as an American where you're not used to those cultural differences. I think a lot of people who grew up in the European market understand that from birth, and they've interacted with the different cultures, and it's much more understood from the European side than it is the American side.
I've had a lot of Europeans come this way to work for me over the years. And one common theme that I found from them or two common things. One is you make decisions so rapidly because you mentally just think we can make another decision. And that's very uncomfortable for them. And the other thing was how important work is to our psyche. Work is something that we do because we value it. It's just different. It's so different for them to, show up on a Saturday and do something to watch a game together, and then why are you talking about work, right? And so did you feel that going the other way?
Oh, very, very much so. I mean, I think the Europeans have a very funny view of the Americans, where their view is that the Americans are always at work. They're not being productive, but they're always at work. And, the American view is, well, there's a 32-hour work week in France. How much do they actually get done? And the answer is with the proper goals and the proper motivation and proper reward system, they get a huge amount done, but not in the American way. And so you have to figure out how to get comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What about the length of time to make decisions or how decisions are made?
Well, decisions are totally different. And the other, there's this innate bias, I think, in America, when there is a problem, that it is a people-related problem, and we need to simply replace the person who created this problem, and then everything will be fine. And in Europe, it's a much more sophisticated view of, well, let's look at what's happening and what's the environment, what's the process, and what do we need to do to actually get the outcome we want. And in many cases, I think it's it's a slower process. It is a more detailed process and a much more holistic process. And that's one of the things actually I tried to bring back from Europe with me, because I think it's a better way to do it, where oftentimes it is not the individual that is they could be part of the cause, but not the sole cause. And until you fix those underlying problems, whoever you put in that role is going to have similar challenges.
Bill, I had, I'll leave the name out of this company, but it was a Fortune 100 company, and they were having problems in market share. And the CEO literally said, we'll keep firing people till market share gets better. And I thought, what an interesting way to look at market share. There's probably more to your problem than the name on the door of the running the business. So you've been able to, in your mind, maybe take the best of both worlds and bring it to the companies that are blessed to have you work with them today.
I've sure tried, because having that broader exposure, I think you just think about the world fundamentally differently, and it impacts every facet of your life. Everything from my goal for my kids is to have them be citizens of the world. And, they've all been fortunate enough to travel to 6 of the 7 continents, and, the penguins of Antarctica will have to wait for a while longer.
They're safe. But the penguins are safe.
It's, I think, incredibly rich from a personal perspective to see different parts of the world, understand what's great about them, enjoy those parts, and bring that back to wherever you are currently. So it's been a real part of my life that I've really enjoyed.
Yeah, that's great. Anything you want to ask him before we?
No.
Bill, this has been wonderful. Go ahead.
I was going to say there's a couple of other communication things I thought might be interesting for your audience. And so, one of the things is, as an American, there's a certain way business is done. And as you go down that path, signing a contract in America is sort of, this is now the negotiation is complete and now we're into delivery. If you go to parts of Asia, signing a contract is just an early milestone in the negotiation process. And then, the scope continues to change and everything else, and you have to manage that entirely differently. The other thing, and I touched a little bit on it earlier in our podcast, but when you talk to some Asian, let me actually take a step back. So when you talk to some Asian countries in a contract negotiation world, what you find is, people will say yes. And yes doesn't mean yes, as the Americans view it. Yes maybe better translates to, I heard you. But I still disagree. And so I think it's having that understanding of culture is critical. And then another great example is understand, as when you're asking a question, you need to make sure the answer that you want is a reasonable answer for them to provide. And I think that sounds probably strange, but we had a big Indian development shop in one of the companies I ran. And I talked to the head of that group and said, hey, how are we doing on this release that was supposed to be done at the end of the week? And I got the answer, everything's great. And I talked to them the following week and I said, I just want to make sure that release went out. He said, no, we need 6 more months. And I said, well, what do you mean 6 more months? Last week, everything was great. And what I learned was saying no in that situation is not an acceptable cultural answer. And so what I learned is you got to ask much smarter questions.
It's very good, Bill. It's very good. Was there another communication example you wanted to provide?
I think those are the big things that I wanted to cover. Anything else that you think would be interesting to your audience?
Bill, we could have you for hours and days and weeks on interesting. But we want to thank you. We'll have you back, of course. And it's very exciting to meet, I think, someone who survived consulting and lived another day, ran companies, multiple cultures, multiple countries. It's been a real blessing, Bill. And do you have anything else?
No.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Bill.
We'll see you soon.
All right. Well, thank you. I really enjoyed it, and always a pleasure, Dean.
All right, take care. Wow. You know what I loved about that, so many things, but really letting people into the box of what was it personally like to be a consultant, be in a software company as a consultant, be the CEO of tech companies, be the CEO of a tech company homed in the UK, have employees, and the whole journey. Many of us have worked global jobs, sure. But I've had as you know, a house overseas, and I've spent a lot of time there. But that's different than making your number, living in a foreign land, managing resources that are not just culturally different, but everything about how you get things done is different.
Yeah. And that difference is exacerbated when headquarters or the home office is located in the U.S. as an example, and you're operating outside of that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, working for an international company that is based there, and then you're operating there. There's a little closer proximity, but in Bill's example, right, it's a people problem or a process problem, but then also in most of the other geographies become sales and marketing regions rather than where the operations happen or the product development or design happens. They're forced to operate more independently and have less access to, there's all sorts of things in there that you have to navigate through in addition to the cultural differences.
Yeah, and you can take something simple like cars, and I've owned European cars and Asian cars, and I don't want to get into car brands, but I have a car now that obviously they don't have design in the U.S. because the wipers aren't fast enough for Houston. We live in Houston rain. But I've had other particular cars, and they are designed in California with us in mind. So I think that's fascinating. We'll love to have Bill back. What a genuine, nice guy, and I love that he brings, as you were alluding to, the best of all the different cultures back in the companies he runs here now.
Yeah, no, it was great. Thanks, Bill.